Okay, and I have a brief presentation, so I will share my screen so that everyone can follow along with me. And let's see here. And all right, now how do I get to, it's always so different, just bear with me. It's so different when it's Zoom and not what we normally use, which is Teams. And how do I get it? Alex, jump in and help me. How do I get the PowerPoint presentation to start? Because I can't see.
Go to the slideshow item on your menu there.
Yep.
It's covered by, hold on, can I move this bar? Let me see if I can move the bar. I can move the bar. Sorry. This is what happens when you never use, we very rarely use Zoom. Okay. Start from the beginning. Okay, and slideshow. Okay. So first off, I'm not sure that I've met many of you, but my name is Melissa Williams, and I am the newest project lead for the Tacoma Park Minor Master Plan Amendment. Here's the good thing. The good thing is that I have been with the commission for 15 years. So I am new to this particular project, but I am not new to planning with the city of Tacoma Park, and I'm not new to the planning department. John Markeline was actually the previous project lead, and he has moved on to greater pastures, and I'm stepping into his position. I was formerly assisting with the community engagement. So when the original invitation went out for me to attend this, I was coming to you as the community engagement planner, not necessarily the project lead. So just a quick history, the Tacoma Park Minor Master Plan Amendment. I'm going to talk to you today about the plan process and timeline, and just kind of give you some information about where we are with the process and how you can continue to participate. So the first thing is showing you the study area. So just kind of clearing up some of the terminology that I'm going to use. So the study area is the area that we actually have where we've compiled all of the information that relates to the plan. So this is where we kind of gather all the demographic information that we will use to subsequently set the existing conditions for the plan area. And so we're looking at the demographics on a census tract level. And so we've actually laid out the census tracts, and that's that large area that you see in blue. And then you have this the smaller, more defined area that's outlined in red. And that is the actual plan area boundary. Now, here's the thing about this. There isn't a lot of residential inside that plan area boundary when you look at the study area, the larger study area. Some of you may live outside of the actual plan area. That does not mean that you are not a participant in this process. You are still a stakeholder. You are still encouraged to participate as fully as you can. When we think about the stakeholders for the plan area, we're really talking about people who live, work, play, or have a vested interest in what happens inside this kind of red boundary. And so we have the study area information, which is essentially 7,700 residents, give or take, and it's roughly 2,943 households. So now let's look at this plan boundary. So the plan boundary is actually a much smaller piece of the area that was included in the 2000 Tacoma Park Master Plan. So that's why it's called an amendment. We're really just doing a very small update to an existing master plan. We're not taking on all of the Tacoma Park Master Plan. So the scope and the boundary, those were approved by the planning board in September. So that's kind of the official start date. So many of you may have seen or heard about that planning board session. That's where they set the study area. They also set the plan area boundary, and there was a lot of back and forth where they talked about what should be included and what should not be included in the plan boundary. And as you can see, it basically came down to the Washington Adventist campus. That's both the hospital and the university. It's also that stretch of Maple Avenue that extends from the community center to the Washington Adventist campus. And then we also have a small piece of Erie Avenue. And that's because we wanted to bring in those commercial and office uses that are located at the Erie Center. So we brought that in as well. And so to give you an idea as to what's going to happen inside this plan boundary, we're going to make recommendations in the following areas. We're looking at environment, land use and zoning, parks and public spaces, transportation, urban design, housing, community resources, and historic resources. And so there will be conversations and meetings that will happen about all of these subjects. And there will be ultimately recommendations that will occur as a result of the work that's being done by our planning team. And also that's going to be further refined by the conversations that we have with the stakeholders. And so just to give you an idea of kind of the scale of this plan, this is a very tiny plan compared to what we normally do. So it's an amendment. It's not even really a sector plan. So it's literally looking at this and taking into account anything that, as far as changes that may need to occur in all of the areas where we're going to make recommendations, because the plan right now is about 22 years old. And so they typically have a horizon between 20 to 25 years. That's kind of when we like to take another look at the plan and to see if some of the things that we thought were going to occur actually occurred, or if technology's changed, or maybe there have been demographic changes that encourage us to take another look at the recommendations that we've made for the plan. So a big part of how we go about getting to the point where we're making recommendations is the equitable engagement process. So we have 4 stages that are defined. We have listening, visioning, refining, and sharing. And so right now we're in the listening stage. That means that we are just gathering information. We are talking to stakeholders. We're talking to other county agencies. We're talking to property owners, and we're taking everything in. We're trying to get firsthand accounts of how people live, work, and play within the plan area. And then we're also comparing what we're hearing from people to the data, what's the data showing us, and is it reflected in how people are actually moving about or living within the community? So that's the stage that we're in now. We're taking all of that into account. And that is what you're going to see at the community meeting that we're going to have on March 29th. And then you'll see a summary of that on March 9th when we present to the City Council. And then you'll see a more comprehensive presentation on March 29th. And that's going to be the community meeting that everyone is encouraged to attend. And then we will give that very same presentation to the planning board on March 31st. And so essentially, that's going to kind of be the culmination of the listening session. We're not out of the listening session yet, but it's kind of, we're at that halfway point, and it's like, this is what we've heard so far. This is what the data is telling us is on the ground. And this is kind of a check-in point where we say, this is what we've got. Tell us if you agree or disagree. And so then we'll move into visioning. Visioning is something that we imagine will happen over the course of the summer. That is going to not only take into account the work that we're doing, but that's the point where you'll also start to see the Washington Adventist University group start to be more present at some of these meetings. They are doing their own existing conditions analysis that they're going to make public at some point. I don't have a date for that. I wish I did, but we are in contact with them. We have regular meetings where they provide us with check-ins and updates on the work that they're doing. But when we get to that visioning phase, that's when you'll start to see kind of the 2 arms of this plan come back together. Because right now it's same body, but you've got your right hand and your left hand. But we are in communication. We do kind of keep track of what the other hand is doing. And then refining is where we are at that point, we have recommendations, and those recommendations become your public hearing draft. And that draft is what is presented to the public. And that's kind of the formal point of the engagement process when you are weighing in and you're providing public testimony and you're becoming kind of a person of record. If you're participating, you become a person of record. And those are the comments and recommendations and things that kind of follow the plan from that point forward all the way through the county process. And sharing is essentially when we get to the point where we have an approved and adopted plan. Now, all of this, that's a very kind of short and dirty version of what happens. You can actually see the breakout of this on our website, and I'm going to provide that information at the end. But for the purposes of the listening phase, just to give you an idea, essentially what we want to know is, tell us about your experience in Tacoma Park. You know, what do you think in terms of your quality of life? How do you use the community? What changes would you like to see? So there's a kind of a broad number of questions that we ask when we're speaking with people. And then we really want to find out, how would you like to be communicated to? Like, what's your communication preference? Some people want to be called on the phone. Other people, you know, others essentially say, I'm a tech person, send an email or talk to me through social media. We take all of that into account, and we use that to craft an engagement strategy where we have the best possible opportunity of speaking with everyone. So this is what we've done so far. So we've done outdoor walks. This is online meetings is something that is going to come up. Unfortunately, this plan, like many of the other plans throughout the agency, started right at the height of the pandemic. And so we had kind of a stopping and starting that happened. Many of you, if you were out at the Tacoma Park Farmers Market or the farmers market that's in the Langley Park area, you may have run into us over the summer. We were actually able to have a few sessions where we were out in the community passing out information and speaking with stakeholders. We also have a survey that's been up the entire time that people are encouraged to respond to. And then we have an email newsletter that goes out on a regular basis. To supplement that, because we were very concerned about losing the opportunity to meet and work with stakeholders, we actually brought in a consultant called Everyday Canvassing. And Everyday Canvassing, they were contracted to go out and do door knocking. So essentially, it's a very old school approach. They were knocking on doors, interviewing residents, passing out flyers, and really just having kind of one-on-one, very personal conversations with people about their dreams and hopes and concerns, anything that kind of related to their life that they were living inside this plan area. And that was a very targeted approach. So the first round of that occurred in December, and it focused in those multifamilies that are along Maple Avenue. I, along with Alex, I think Alex went out, but I, along with a few other people that were on the plan, we actually participated as well. It was a very informative process. We went out, we asked them questions that we had from a question bank, and we have all of that information that was synthesized into data that we could actually use for the plan. And the long and the short of it is that it really gave us, it indicated to us where the concerns were. So we know where the people that we spoke to on Maple Avenue, we kind of have a general idea as to what their major concerns were. We know that that's not representative of the entire plan area, but it does help when we're crafting recommendations that would directly impact them. We're going to have a second round of this on the Washington Adventist University campus. So that's going to actually start on March 14th, and that's going to run for about a month. And we're actually going to be working closely with the Washington Adventist University administration and the students to actually go out, and they're going to be essentially in the activity centers located on the campus, talking with students and staff and administration and faculty, and essentially anyone who's across that campus during that period may actually run into one of our canvassers, and you are encouraged to have a conversation with them and to participate. And so all of that information, it once again is taken into account, and we look at it for what it is. We're looking at it in terms of what were the considerations of the people that were the users of the campus. And so right now, in terms of other engagement activities that we have occurring, we have the City of Tacoma Park session, which is an existing conditions presentation. So that's going to happen on March 9th. We are scheduled to be there. I believe we will be presenting at 6:30, but our entire team will be present. So you will have an opportunity to meet our team, which is roughly 7 to 8 people, a representative from all of those disciplines that I spoke to earlier. Then we will have our larger community meeting on March 29th. That will be a virtual meeting. We're going to actually send out noticing for that this week, and everyone is encouraged to RSVP. There's a variety of reasons we're encouraging people to RSVP. One of the most important reasons is that we can provide translation services for those that need it, and we need to be aware of what type of service is required so that we can make sure that we have those accommodations covered. And that's going to be on, like I said, on March 29th from 6 to 8. And then we will follow that up with our presentation to the planning board on March 31st. And looks like there's an extra bullet in there. Sorry about that. We'll follow that up to the planning board on March 31st. My understanding is that the planning board will be allowing for some public comment. I'm not sure how that's working right now. I know that there's been a change in how some of the planning board sessions are working, but my understanding is as of today, you will be, if you wanted to, you could actually speak at the planning board session on March 31st. And so this is our timeline. So, right now, like I said, we are still in the very early stages. If you look where we fall right now, we're really only that second bullet. So there's a lot of work that has to happen between now and the summer of 2023, which is the goal for kind of the completion of the process. So we're looking to get through, as I stated earlier, our visioning and preliminary recommendations. That should happen over the course of the summer, with the hope of having what we call a progress draft, which is essentially your public hearing draft. We're hoping to have that in the fall. And what would happen then is that there would be a completed draft that everyone would be able to take a look at, that would have all of the recommendations that came about as a result of the work that was done in visioning and preliminary recommendations. And that's kind of a formal document. There's a public notice process. There's a notice that goes out that essentially has a 30-day period or so where there's a comment period. And that's followed up with a public hearing where at that point you can come in and you can provide what we refer to as testimony to the planning board. And you can share your thoughts regarding that document. And you can also introduce other things if you'd like. And then there are work sessions that happen as a result of that. And so I always try to tell people that the work sessions are important. It's important to participate in the public hearing because the public hearing influences the work sessions. So an example would be if we had a public hearing and the vast majority of the comments related to, I'll just say transportation. That may not be the case, but I'll use that as an example. If the vast majority of the comments that we heard at the public hearing related to transportation, that makes it more likely that one of the first work sessions and probably one of the sessions that would get the most attention would be the transportation work session, because it's incumbent upon us to respond to any questions or concerns that are raised as a part of the public hearing. So that's why it becomes very important that if you do have something that you're passionate about, that you make sure that you bring that up as a part of the public hearing. And then once we go through all of those sessions with the planning board, we refine that document. That document is then sent up to the county council as a planning board draft. And believe it or not, the process starts all over again. So then you have another public hearing where you are then given another opportunity to respond to that particular document. Then there are work sessions very similar to the ones that are done in front of the planning board. And then if everyone is in agreement, it becomes an approved document. And then at that point, it comes back to the planning board to become a formal approved and adopted document. And then and only then is it followed up with something that is called the sectional map amendment. And this is a part of the plan that doesn't get a lot of public attention, but I want everyone to understand that the vast, the important part of the work is the part in the plan is when the zoning is changed. It's the zoning change that is kind of the key legislative tool or legislative power that we have. That actually happens in the sectional map amendment. The plan only makes a recommendation for zoning. The zoning is not changed until a sectional map amendment is approved and adopted as well. And so all of those things are scheduled to happen next summer. And that kind of concludes the presentation that I have, but I also felt it was important to kind of put on the screen, how can you stay involved? If you're not signed up for our e-letter, you can go to our website to get that information. I encourage you to sign up because it's one of the ways that we can get information directly to you so that you don't have to wade through a lot of things to get to it. And anything that's related to the plan or anything new that happens to the plan, you would get that in your email. We don't use it for anything else. If you are signed up for the Tacoma Park Minor Master Plan e-letter, that's the only e-letter you would get from us unless you say you want to receive additional information. I also have my contact information here, and that the number at the bottom is actually my direct number. And then we have an email address for the plan. Some of you have my personal email. You have that, you can definitely feel free to use that, but we also have an email that is specific to the plan. And that is the end of my presentation, and I can stop screen sharing unless you wanted me to go back to one of the previous slides.
I made a call for any clarifying questions. I do not see any. I think you've done a very clear job, very informative. Thank you very much.
Philip, I have a question.
A number of us are going to get to know each other and you very well over the coming couple of years.
I imagine. I can't wait. I think there was a question. Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Philip. Ms. Williams, I appreciate the presentation. I understand that I was told by city staff that the survey results on Maple Avenue were available, and they just haven't had the opportunity to give them to me. Do you have any insights from those surveys that talk about what the residents of Maple Avenue would like to see on the campus?
It's interesting because there wasn't a lot of conversation. I expected that there would be more conversation about what they wanted to see on that campus. I think by and large, because we were talking to them in December, and December was kind of when that new variant came through, that by and large, what we heard was the fear of losing a hospital. Everyone, for the most part, when we talked about the future of the campus, what we heard more often than not was, I hope they keep some sort of hospital there. I'm fearful of not having a doctor around the corner, or, what happens if it closes and I get sick, or if the pandemic gets worse and we need medical care. And so there was a lot of that. There were also a few people that started to think big. There were people that, spoke to, it was a good location for the co-op. There was this fear that the co-op might have to move. And if the co-op needed to move, then why couldn't they put it there? There was also, requests for housing. It was essentially the comments were more in line with whatever the fear was of the person that we were talking to, whatever their most pressing concern was, that was what they wanted to see happen on the campus. So for those people that were concerned about housing affordability, they said, we need more affordable housing. You should put some affordable housing there. For people that were concerned about quality of life as it relates to kind of health and wellness, their thought was, don't close the hospital, or if you're gonna close it, we should have a clinic. There should still be some sort of medical office presence there. For people that were concerned about the co-op and the loss of the co-op, the default was, why can't the co-op be there? And I imagine that because we do have their contact information, And so a lot of them did sign up for the e-letter. I think what is going to happen is that as we've moved kind of beyond the, I don't want to say we've moved beyond the pandemic because I don't think that's accurate, but as we've gotten further and further away from what, the hype that we had in December, I think that we'll be able to go back to people and ask them more specific questions as they relate to kind of the Washington Adventist campus. And we'll probably get different answers from the students. I think that not just the students, but the people that are active users of the campus will probably have more definitive answers about what they think needs to happen there as well.
Thank you. Look forward to your presentation to the council.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge Jared Smith, council member from Ward 5, and Cindy DeBala is here as well from Ward 2. I hope all of you can stay through the next 3 presentations because I think the content has been very well prepared and will be of interest. I'd like to turn it over to David Reed, Long Branch Sligo Citizens Association.
First of all, thank you so much, Melissa and Alex, for taking the time to be with us this evening. And it's really gratifying to feel that we're being involved in an early stage of this process. So your presentation was very clear and encouraging and certainly motivating to make sure we stay involved with you. I'd also like to thank Philip and the Climate Action Coffee that organized this event tonight. So yes, I am the president of the Sligo Long Branch Community Association, which hosts about 440 residential units. Our geography is defined on the southwest by Sligo Creek, on the southeast by Long Branch, and on the north by Carroll Avenue, which means that anything that happens on the campus has a direct impact and consequences for us here in Long Branch. So what I would like to do is identify 4 themes, Melissa and Alex, that are 5 themes of particular concern to members, this 440 some residential units here in LBS. And the first of those is actually the question of traffic. We already experience regular waves that cut through traffic running from New Hampshire Avenue up to Carroll, up to Piney Branch. And boy, when it comes Friday and they shut down Sligo Creek Parkway, stay inside because you're just likely to get run over by people come tearing through here. So really one of the questions that we have is, will the residences and the new commercial activities on the campus increase both car and commercial traffic, or if properly designed, can it actually enhance the walkability and the bikeability of this whole region? The second point that we'd like to raise regards stormwater. Now, you may be aware that last summer, Long Branch Sligo conducted a survey of our residents about the impact of stormwater runoff and flooding. And we had approximately 10% of our residential units respond to this survey. And we were really quite shocked to find the level of impact that stormwater flooding has had on people living here. The average expenditure of average household that the respondents was $5,000 per household. And in some cases it was $35,000 and up, that actually expenditures to prevent, address the flooding issues that are clearly with us now and will certainly intensify in coming years. So if you really want to get a sense of what we're talking about, we invite you to join us for a heavy precipitation event down at the bottom of Flower and Garland Avenue, and make sure you bring your own flotation device for your own safety purposes. We are also concerned about the university's recent paving of the major parking lot with its impervious asphalt. So rather than making it with pervious covering, it does not dissipate the rainwater, which of course is going to intensify in coming years at the crest of this sub-drainage area, and rather it concentrates torrents of water into the outfalls into Sligo, which then intensifies flooding further downstream. So one of the major questions we have is, how will campus developments alleviate or intensify these problems. As we know, precipitation events are going to increase in volume and frequency in coming years. So that brings in the question of vegetation, forestation process that you'll be including in the program. The third area of concern is business development. And we strongly encourage development of small scale, say food stores, cafes, restaurants, as well as it's important to consider the low-income duplex and triplex housing stock on a modest scale. We certainly know that the pressures on housing in Tacoma Park really require us giving ample attention to moderate priced in housing units here. The question will be, though, will the business development, the housing development, encourage regular participation from people from Maple Avenue, from LBS, and from other people? Will people finally get out of their cars and spend more time on foot and on bike, providing the kind of urban nucleus that we need for a really healthy environmental context, or are we going to have more pollution, more traffic, more noise, and so forth? So we're really interested in the commercial dimensions of the presentation. The fourth issue that we're looking at then are recreational opportunities, because at the present time, communities are basically prohibited from using the enhanced recreational facilities on the campus. So there are many teens and younger kids who really need space to play in. And so where they can engage in different kinds of sports activities. So we're really interested to know if the Planning Commission will be exploring these opportunities, not only for LBS folks, but also for our neighbors along Maple Avenue. And then finally, the final issue I'd like to raise with you is the security issues. Long Branch-Sligo has had its share of nuisance and more serious crime. All the while, we can say that over the past several years, it's been very stable. And we recently met with the Chief Duvall and had an excellent exploration of this issue with him. That said, we've also experienced quite a rash of car theft and vandalism in recent years. And so we just want to register our concern and work with you to figure out how we can address this new influx and flow of shoppers, visitors, drivers, and to prevent that we have a new cycle of security issues. So we really look forward to working with you on this. So thank you so much. And really, I do look forward to working with you in the coming years on this.
Thank you very much, David. Our next talk will be by Lincoln Smith. Some of you may be familiar with him. He's one of the co-designers, co-founders of an experiment that's been very successful in Bowie called Forested. 10 acres. I think they've now added another 5, so they're 15 acres of forest and recovering farmland. I'll just say that Climate Action Coffee, our group, has been meeting weekly every Wednesday since October 2019. And of course, like many of you, pivoting to Zoom in March of 2020. We have spawned 4 or 5 other subgroups working on everything from pollinators' native habitat, stormwater issues, educating youth, working with youth and nature. The newest group is one that's focusing on the potential of establishing a food forest in Tacoma Park. And about a dozen members or more have recently been energized around this topic. So we've invited Lincoln to give a short talk about what is a food forest. And then following that, Amy Zimmermann from our group will be kind of presenting some design ideas using the Washington Adventist Hospital site and showing some what might be possible there. So I turn it over to Lincoln, excuse me.
All right, thanks Phil, and thanks for everyone for having me. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we're good.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun being here. I love hearing the planning process going forward. My degree was in landscape design and planning, and it's been a while since I've gotten to see the planning side, and I do admire it. I admire the patience with these multi-year necessary processes to get to a good result. So I'm here to speak to you about food forests, which I think can potentially be a neat element an important community resource and enhancement to the environment in the study area. So something worth bearing in mind, and while the planning goes forward for what's going to happen with this really cool section of Tacoma Park. And I'll keep this to 10 minutes, but I'm a neighbor of yours about 20 minutes down the road in Bowie, Maryland. So if you want to come out and see the 10-acre food forest over here and talk more about it, I'm very happy to do that. Geek out about plants. We've been here about 10 years and tried all kinds of different, just about anything that is edible, we've tried growing it. So happy to follow up with anybody that wants more information. But to start with, I'd like to remind everyone that we live in a temperate forest. That is the biome or the bioregion where we live. It produces forest, and this forest really is the sustainer of life in this region. It is what cleans the water for us. It solves the stormwater problems, like we were just hearing about. It sequesters carbon, provides wildlife habitat, etc. And so, to the extent that we can in our communities, we should be thinking forest. That doesn't mean absolutely every square inch of the landscape, but the forest is a great provider of services and quality of life that are important to our communities. The way we tend to grow our food these days usually involves removing the forest and growing crops by other means, which is, we are privileged in this era, most of us, to have plenty of food, but we are also having a major impact on the ecosystem. So forest gardens or food forests are part of the bigger agroecology movement that says, how can we restore ecosystem function to our lands and produce the food we need at the same time? So you'll hear a variety of different terms, agroforestry, food forest, forest garden, all having to do with how can the people living here in this forest region integrate more with the forest where we live? How can we get some of the things that we need to sustain our lives from this forest? Because if we do, we're engaging with the landscape, we're outside, we're eating healthier food, and there are numerous benefits. And I've gotten to work with many people in this movement that have, each food forest is different, and I've seen so many cool versions of this. So I'll give you just a quick taste of this. Just a little bit more about my background. Here we are in Bowie, Maryland, where we have this 10-acre site, as Phil was saying. It's about 10 years old now. So young yet for a forest, but we are starting to produce significant quantities of food and learning a lot about what is it to grow a food forest in this region. So that's our mission, is to experiment with this so that we can then help anybody else that is interested in doing food forests to succeed with that endeavor. So a food forest is a mix of the crops that you're growing for your own consumption and supporting native plants that are going to provide that wildlife habitat, that insect diversity, the pollinators, everything that is actually going to benefit your crops as well as benefit the health of the environment more broadly. We pay a lot of attention to what crops or potential crops are growing already on land without anybody planting them.
Lincoln?
Yes.
I suspect we're not seeing, if you're advancing slides, we're still stuck on the...
Oh, thank you. Thank you for mentioning. Okay, gracious. I will, slides are looking great for me.
You may need to back out and come in and reselect.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna stop the share. Thank you, Phil. Let's see, let me try that again. Okay, do you see an urban looking slide right now? Yes.
Yes.
And let's see if it will advance. Do you see a sketch?
Yes.
Of some trees? Okay, cool. Thank you for your patience. All right. All right, so I'm not going to repeat any content, but this is an aerial view of forested in Bowie, where we're doing the experiment, seeing what will grow well and how can we do growing crops and restoration of ecosystem function. Here's some of our volunteer staff harvesting blackberries. And this is a neat example where, like, if you don't plant anything, some wild blackberries are going to come up, and we pay a lot of attention to that. It's like the land will give you hints as to what it wants to produce in the way of useful food. So we let some of those wild blackberries, but we also will grow some of the ones that have been selected to make a nicer fruit. Maybe they have less thorns on them, but we're working as close as possible to what the ecosystem is suggesting we might want to do. Just a quick example of something. We grow a bunch of different mushrooms. We grow fruits, vegetables, etc. If it's edible, we'll give it a shot around here. But we do emphasize those native plants or things that are closely related. I know I'm kind of rushing through this. I am happy to provide like plant lists and stuff for anybody after. So another thing we do here is we do the cultural connection, where it's like, it's okay, it's all very well to produce these kind of fun, some of them kind of weird fruits, but what do you then do with them? So we get to work with chefs who will take the produce that we're growing and then make it into something that's really delicious and culturally fun for people. So people arrive to the site, and our team comes out and gives appetizers, and they get to walk around and look at the forest that is providing the food for this dinner. And then everybody sits down and gets to eat dinner together. So it's a lot of fun. And it is a real community builder is what I found. And with all the food forests that I've gotten to be involved with, it takes a while for the thing to start producing any fruit. It takes a while for people to start understanding it. But if you persist, man, it brings people together. They work together. They enjoy the produce together. All of our ancestors from wherever we were around the world would have been doing activities like this. And it is a major part of bringing people together and building relationships in a pretty special way. Just flipping through a couple of pictures of the different food here. Let me just go on. I've gotten to work around the DC area now with many different private clients, but also 4 different municipalities with which we have done now. We've implemented 6 different public food forests with more in the works at the moment. And I wanted to highlight the Emerson Food Forest over in Hyattsville. Mayor Hollingsworth has moved on to other roles now, but she had a vision for food forests throughout Hyattsville, again, for that community. She really cared about building community. And this place has now started to bear fruit. And you see the kids of the neighborhood in there enjoying the fruit on a regular basis. The guy, my friend in the auto body shop that's next door to the parcel, he always jokes like he's going to put on the persimmon tree that it's for research purposes only, because like he wants all the persimmons for himself. So it's fun to see these things start to bear fruit. It does take a couple of years. So I'm not going to dive real deep into the horticulture, but what you will find in a food forest is a variety of different types of plants growing together, mimicking the way they do in the forest. It isn't an orchard in the sense of a big block of just one kind of tree growing, because we call that monoculture, and it has the advantages of being easy to manage industrially, but you do have certain issues arising from that, like pests and susceptibility to disease. So we try to mimic the diversity of the forest. The forest you never find in the wild forest, just a block of one species growing and nothing else there. It's the diversity of the forest that makes it so effective and so strong. So we try to mimic that with the way we design forest gardens, but keep it organized enough that we can navigate around there and harvest the crops. So like in this particular slide, you have a pecan tree there. It's young yet, but they start producing nuts. And you have a Chickasaw plum, which is one of our native plums. In the background, that's high bush cranberry and various other things here. The garden is, it does include those things you're going to eat, but it also includes things that are there to build up the soil. In many of our urban and agricultural landscapes, the soil, through having been cleared and tilled or possibly paved or compacted over time, the soil can be pretty poor in quality, but there are plants that function well to build up the soil again. So we always try to include soil building plants that are going to try to help make that landscape more habitable for the fruit trees and other crops that we want to grow. We also include plants that are specifically there to attract beneficial insects. Broadly speaking, the bigger your diversity of native plants, the bigger your diversity of native insects. And again, as with the forest, if you have a large diversity of different species together, you're much less likely to have one species, like that thing that wants to eat your pears or whatever you're trying to grow, much less likely that those are going to just explode in their population, because you have a lot of different insects together. So we plant things like, we don't even eat this winterberry holly, but it is there to feed birds. And so we've watched the bird diversity and just the abundance really come up, like in this parcel in the 10 years we've been working here. And as you can see, my friend Chuck likes to take pictures of these birds. You can see the bluebird there on the left helping out by eating some of the insects. So by growing a variety of things that make a rich habitat, you obviously get the enjoyment of having those birds and other species around, but they also will help you out with the actual crops that you're trying to grow. Here's another quick example. This is a predatory wasp that helps take care of Japanese beetles. So that's neat to see. And this wasp needs the goldenrod that you see, that's that flower that it's on right there. So you plant the goldenrod because it helps bring the right kind of bugs. Here's another slightly scary predator bug, assassin bug. Those are fun to see. We've seen the gray tree frogs come in. They're really tiny. They look kind of big in this photo, but again, helpful with pests. So that's the sort of plants and wildlife side. And then on the other side that is the people side, which really in a lot of ways is the most important piece of it. Like, it's all very well to grow plants and start to produce fruit, but if there's no people in that landscape, a food forest really isn't doing its job or functioning as a food forest. But there are so many cool different ways you can engage the local community, depending on who it is. This is an example of one of the school kid groups that we have come through here. And sometimes it'll be just a field trip. Other times we'll have a work activity like you see here. The kids get to try the different fruit. Other times it might be like, more of a corporate group that's more there just to have a change of scene and get to talk to each other in a fun setting. And there's something about being able to be together in a landscape with the food that is a very kind of a primal human experience and is beneficial to people. So it brings people together, and it's a very important part of a food forest. This is a mushroom log preparing workday here. And I think my time is just about up. This is a persimmon, which is a plant that happens to grow just around here really well. This has become a real star of the show for us, among others. Also, you may know this Bradford pear tree that grows all over the place and blooms. It's an invasive plant. The cool thing is you can graft it. You can cut down a Bradford pear and graft it to be a good fruiting pear, and then it's no longer invasive either. So we just have these invasive pears in our particular site, and I guarantee they're probably in Tacoma Park too. There's thousands of them. And so it's really satisfying to be able to work some of them over into actually producing a good fruit. So there's all kinds of possibilities. I won't go into them right now, but just want to leave you with the idea that there is a lot of potential in food forests. My spot is like sort of out in this sort of like a leftover piece of farmland in the suburbs of Bowie. Many of the food forests that I work on are in more urban settings, and they will take different forms depending on what the context is and what the other uses are of that landscape. But one of the main things I'd like to leave you with is the idea that a food forest is compatible with many other different uses and can even enhance them. Like we had at Capital City Public Charter School, we did a food forest, and we negotiated back and forth with the sports coordinator for the school, like to make sure that we weren't going to be encroaching on the sports area. But along the way, we learned like they were lacking seating for the parents wanting to come watch the sports. So we incorporated the seating in to the forest garden where people can sit there and enjoy both the garden and the sports at the same time. And so it ended up benefiting both of those uses. And so it really can be integrated very well into a bigger fabric of whatever's going on the site. And yeah, kids love berries. I think that's obvious.
Thanks very much, Lincoln.
And, yeah. All right.
I posted your website address in the chat. I've been out there a couple times. I've never been able to sit down for the feast, but I'm looking forward to someday soon being able to do that. I'll just say that these guys give a very good educational tour. I think you still have a few ducks and geese as part of the community of life that you support out there.
That's
and
right.
A CSA, if anybody's nearby, I think you can benefit from the bounty of what's happening. So thanks again. I'm sure we'll be in touch. And I believe Armand works with you. He's part of our team here that's looking at the Adventist site as well. I think
Can we ask questions?
The next tour for anybody that would like to get into deeper is first Saturday in April. So that's the next time we have like an open house tour but yeah, you had a question?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. This is really exciting. Is this a partnership with your organization in the city of Hyattsville and the city of Bowie? Or how does the municipality own the land? Do you guys own the land? Do you receive grants to fund the work that you guys are doing?
Yeah, good question. There's a couple of different sites. So there is one that I rent in Bowie, and it's actually owned by a church, and I rent the land, and that's my project. The municipal sites have all been owned by the municipalities. So with Hyattsville, it was a double vacant lot that the city had owned for something like 30 years, and basically nothing had happened with it. And so they decided to develop it into the Emerson Street Food Forest. And I worked with them as the designer, and I also helped with that community engagement, like going around talking to all the neighbors and with organizing events to get the word out. But yeah, they take care of it, and they continue to engage the community.
Have you spoken to Washington Adventist University about the hospital site, possibly doing something now or in the near future?
I actually have not met them yet. I was recently, because I'm friends with some of the people working on this, and I'm a food forest guy, I was invited to come over and talk about food forests, but I don't have very much background on the Adventist site, although I did get to walk it for the first time earlier this week, or last week, I think.
All right, well, this is exciting. We need to facilitate that meeting. I would like to see something like this happen before we start breaking ground.
So Jarrett.
Yes.
Stay tuned for what our next presentation. We've already started thinking this way. So yeah, right. Stay tuned.
Okay.
And another slideshow.
Lincoln, there are a few questions from Sandra in the chat. I think you largely answered the first one. Are non-native plants managed in a food forest? Her second question, are there issues with deer eating the plant materials? And the last part is minimum number of square feet needed to create a micro food forest.
Oh, food forests can be pretty small. There's dwarf trees, certainly are great, and they don't need to all resemble a forest when you hear that word. It could just be, you can get so much fruit off of a few berry bushes and a dwarf tree. So whatever you have, and you can even grow edible mushrooms in the mulch underneath those plants. So you'd be surprised how much food you can get from a small space. And deer are absolutely, they're a challenge that has to be dealt with in one way or another, unless it happens to be an area where there aren't deer. With the beautiful Sligo corridor there, I'm sure you have plenty of deer in that particular location. So that means guards on the trees. Sometimes it means fenced areas or other deterrents. But yes, they are a factor.
Thanks very much again. Let's move along to Amy's presentation.
Sure. Philip, can I share my screen? It says that someone else is sharing.
Oh, I think you should be able to do it now. The link is stopped.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Can you all see my screen and hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, great. So nice to meet you all. My name is Amy and I'm a Tacoma Park resident. My background is that I love vibrant community spaces, living with nature and eating a lot from the garden. And I'm speaking to you on behalf of the Tacoma Park Community Food Forest Group. We are, as Philip mentioned, a volunteer group of neighbors in Tacoma Park, and we're working towards our shared dream of a food forest in Tacoma Park. We think that the Washington Adventist Hospital site would be particularly well suited to this. And as Jared called out, we're really interested to meet with the university in the near future, hopefully, to further develop this idea. So to everyone here, our county and city planners, Climate Action Coffee members, and our neighbors, we're really honored to get to present this idea to you, and we're very interested to hear your feedback about this. Lincoln spoke about what a food forest is, and I'm going to focus on the community aspect of a community food forest and why it would particularly fit into our community at the Washington Adventist Hospital site. I'll start by addressing how a food forest fits the priorities of the minor master plan, and then I'll highlight how a food forest fits some of the unique characteristics of this site. I'll give some examples of successful food forests nearby, and I'll show some preliminary site design drawings of what a food forest here could look like. Finally, I'll wrap up with some next steps for a food forest. So I'll start by talking about how a food forest could contribute to the priorities of the Tacoma Park Minor Master Plan Amendment: housing, climate, parks, and local business. For housing, a food forest would enhance the overall livability of our community, promote the health and well-being of residents, foster a sense of community, create a hub for events, recreation, education, and volunteering, and improve food sovereignty and food security with free access to nutritious food. On climate and sustainability, a food forest contributes to several aspects of Montgomery County's Climate Action Plan by sequestering carbon, reducing air pollution, erosion, stormwater runoff, and flooding, providing habitat for wildlife and pollinators, and shading the surrounding buildings to lower energy costs and cool the urban heat island effect. For parks and open space, a food forest would add green space to our community. It would improve access to the existing green space. It would offer us a unique kind of park and add to the tree canopy. And finally, for supporting local business, the food forest could provide free community space for events, markets, artist spaces to support a diverse range of local businesses. We could also partner with other local gardens and food producers like Coiner Farm in Silver Spring. The Washington Adventist Hospital site here has several characteristics that are well suited to a food forest. Around 18% of neighbors experience food insecurity. 14% live below the poverty line, and the CDC ranks this area high in social vulnerability compared to other parts of Tacoma Park and other parts of Maryland. There are many apartment buildings around the site whose residents could enjoy access to gardens and green space. There are 1,000 students at Washington Adventist University who could use the food forest for educational opportunities, and it would be accessible to a diverse mix of people, with a majority of the surrounding neighborhood being people of color, and the proximity to the Sligo Creek Trail draws a wide range of folks from other nearby areas. The site, as many of you have mentioned, has severe stormwater runoff issues, which our proposal could help to mitigate. And we focus primarily on parts of the site that have steep inclines and would be difficult to use for other purposes like development. Finally, Tacoma Park has a history of environmental leadership, which would position us well to lead in demonstrating and promoting food forests throughout Montgomery County. As Lincoln called out, there are at least a dozen food forests nearby in DC and PG County, which has served as an inspiration to our project. At Capital City Public Charter School on the left here in Manor Park, DC, a food forest is funded by environmental grants. It's managed by the school's garden coordinator, and it's widely used for student learning. Emerson Street Food Forest in Hyattsville, which you saw in Lincoln's presentation, is an edible community park that's funded and managed by the city government. And on the right here is Mount Rainier's Community Food Forest, which was a vacant city lot that a group of volunteer neighbors transformed into a food forest in collaboration with the city. The park is now an iconic part of Mount Rainier, and it draws many families with places for kids to play and read. These parks are an example for us, and there's a synergy to having many of them in the region. There's a green corridor of native habitats around Mount Rainier that collectively support biodiversity, pollinators, and ecosystems. So a food forest in Tacoma Park would add another stop on this bee highway. Here are some plants that could be included at the Washington Adventist Hospital site. Aronia is a superfood berry. Pawpaws here are a fruit that tastes like a mango banana. We have figs and service berries, which are similar to blueberries. And all of these provide delicious fruit for humans and wildlife. The milkweed provides habitat for the beautiful monarch butterfly. And the American sycamore, along with others, are excellent for water management. So here's an idea of how this could look with a focus on capturing stormwater runoff. Currently, there's Sligo Creek here. There's a steep forested hill up to the hospital buildings. And then along Maple and Maplewood Avenue, there's a sloped lawn space here. So in this idea, we leave the hospital area blank as potentially buildable space. And we focus on the hills along the borders, which have severe water issues and would be hard to build on. We could have a rain garden park along the edge here, adding a path for walking. Alongside would be water absorbing trees and shrubs and a rain retention system with wetland ecosystems like you see in the photo at the bottom. The forest would be preserved as a woodland buffer. On the sloped lawn, we could plant edible trees and bushes that folks can access to eat. In the drawing, you can see how pathways capture water in swales along the slope so that water can be absorbed by trees instead of runoff. And along with fruit trees, there are plants to attract pollinators and nitrogen-fixing plants to fertilize the soil. At the flatter top part here of the lawn, we have a community space, including raised vegetable beds, an herb spiral, and compost. And here's another idea of how this could look that's focused on creating community spaces filled with edible landscaping. So here we integrate with the existing buildings and spaces on the site. The university lawn here is the highest point on the property and it has a lot of runoff. So we could add trees to hold water and small bushes like blueberries for students or residents walking by to eat. And we add here in red a central arbor that could be a place for social gatherings. We include plants like an herb spiral that are really easy to maintain. And right around the existing buildings, we add plants to make use of the space, including native plants and habitats for pollinators. On the edge of the hill here, we add fruit trees that are easy to access. And these big trees here are American sycamore trees, which are known for their ability to hold water and keep it from running off of that steep slope. And then by Maple and Maplewood Avenue, we add fruit trees around the border and we keep the inner space green for community use. Wrapping up, we believe that a food forest modeled on successful examples in the region and tailored to the specific goals and characteristics of this site can be a unique asset to our community. There are a few quotes here on this page that summarize what a food forest can bring. From CNN, Atlanta creates the nation's largest free food forest with the hopes of addressing food insecurity. From the Washington Post in DC, school leaders intend for this edible forest garden to yield a bumper crop of benefits: educational, nutritional, environmental, even vocational. And from The Guardian, a resident near a Seattle food forest says, "It's nourishing both for our bodies and our hearts to show up to this space." With that, we look forward to discussing with all of you. Does this fit your goals for the space? What else do you want to know to explore this proposal? And what are the next steps? We'll have some time for comments and questions in a few minutes. And you can also reach out to me by email here with any follow-ups. And with that, I will pass it back to Phil.
Thank you very much, Amy. And to all our presenters, it's been a very rich kind of overview of what's happening, what could happen, and some ideas for addressing quite a variety of issues, from building community, providing food, dealing with stormwater issues, climate issues, and so on. So grateful for everybody's contribution, and hope we can continue to foster this conversation going forward. I did want to mention there's another version of food forests or non-food forests called the Miyawaki forest. Conventional forestry typically plants trees at a spacing of 10 or 15 feet. Miyawaki forests start with smaller trees at a 1 to 1.5 foot density, but they're typically 40, 50, 60 species planted in a very intense area with a considerable amount of work going into soil preparation, paying attention to the microbes that support the fertility of the trees. And the idea is, with a diversity of species, they help each other in different ways, and the forest actually grows very quickly. It looks like an intense thicket as it gets going, but after a few years, it's capable of sustaining itself. And there are versions of Miyawaki forests that are food forests. I'm putting in the chat the talk that we did back in December about Miyawaki forests. There are about 4 or 5 groups in the Metro DC area that are considering doing these. They're often done on school grounds, but they also provide buffers and vegetated environment next to buildings and streets, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the partners in our exploration for doing Miyawaki Forest is the Reed Center. Ben Fritton is head of that. Ben worked with Lincoln to establish Forested in Bowie, and they have big plans for, I think it's about 150 acres just west of Frederick in Middletown, Maryland. But that site is, they've agreed to install a Miyawaki forest in the spring of 2023, and between now and then develop training, educational programs, helping people to learn about the design process for that. And they've offered basically space on the land to create a nursery for growing the species of trees that would be used in our urban environments and in these food forests. And I suspect Lincoln might be willing to help with that as well on his site. But I'll stop there. There were a few questions in the chat that I'll go back to. Let's see, Sandra again asked, do food forests typically incorporate honeybee hives? And can they become self-sustaining through selling fruits, using fruits to prepare baked goods, et cetera? So I'm imagining, Lincoln, those are questions for you.
Sure, yeah. Bees can certainly be part of it. I really enjoy having the bees at Forested kept by, I just contacted the local bee club, Bomba, and these beekeepers started keeping bees there. It's been great. Food forest, you can certainly sell some of the produce. Yeah, I tend to categorize each crop differently. Like, it's either there for experiment or in community enjoyment, or maybe you're going to emphasize something and amp it up to a commercial, small commercial production level. And we've done some of each at Forested. With a lot of these food forests, to be honest, they're not going to make a lot of produce sales. If you want to go that way, you can, but it means hiring skilled laborers to intensively harvest and package and distribute that food. So income, if any, tends to come more from interpretive type of things if it is a community park-like setting. So I could speak more to it, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Great. Cindy or Jarrett, defer to you guys in case you have any questions for any of our speakers this evening.
I've asked plenty of questions. I'll just say I love all these presentations. I hope the ideas that Amy and Lincoln presented can come to the council in the future. I think it's important that we see these ideas, but I will defer to my colleague Cindy, who hasn't had an opportunity to speak, to ask some questions.
Thanks. I'm familiar with the concept, and I guess I'm already up to the practical. So where would it go if the land is privately owned? How does that work? That leads to connecting with Washington Adventist University through the minor master plan process.
Well, we do have a community, the city does own a parcel of land that has a wonderful hill that you could do a food forest on. So just putting that in your thinking cap.
Well, I'm thinking this is a meeting about the minor master plan.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I could just add about how could a process work? This is not me promising anything for Washington Adventist University.
This is the question I asked. Thank you.
Yeah, what I will say is that as a part of the development process, depending upon the type of zoning that is applied to the parcel, there is a requirement for open space. So there's typically some sort of open space requirement, and there's some flexibility there. That's where you start to have some flexibility. Typically, when we're talking about these larger parcels, it typically ends up being that the Parks Department ends up with kind of a 10% of the developable land is set aside for parks and open space, or parks and public space. It depends on kind of what bucket they put it in, but it's still the same thing. And then from that, we have a conversation about, is it park-owned land that is park-owned and park-operated? Is it privately owned and park-operated, or is it privately owned and privately operated? But it still has a public component. So it doesn't necessarily matter who owns and operates it. It still has to be something that is available to and open to and accessible by the public. So there is there is a way to have the conversation. So it's not that, you know, there isn't kind of a pathway to having this conversation as a part of the master plan amendment. It's just looking at how do we get from public space to forested land or food forest. So that's kind of the conversation that you're really looking at, is how do we go from public space to food forest? Because that would probably be something that, interestingly enough, all the food forests that you show were actually in the Prince George's County and Montgomery County Planning and Prince George's County Planning are part of the same commission. So there is kind of, you have that working for the conversation, is that it's not something that's foreign to the commission, even though it may be something that has not been actively pursued or actively done in Montgomery County yet. And I'm not saying that it hasn't, I just hadn't heard of it before.
I do have two other questions, Melissa. One is for you, and that is in the following up on something that Councilmember Smith said earlier. What feedback have you gotten, if any, from the immediate neighbors that you've been engaged with in terms of open space, public space, parkland, things in that 10% category?
I can say that first off, we haven't had a lot of conversations with those surrounding neighborhoods. So that is something that we're actively going to be working on now that we've been given kind of more permission to have more face-to-face conversations and to start to schedule some more traditional meetings. But what we did hear, the conversations that we did have, were essentially everything that was said today, is that there are fields that are there that everyone would like to see made available. They'd like to see more of an open campus. Interestingly enough, when we've spoken with Washington Adventists, their position is that they are also open. They would also like to see an open campus, and they would also like the community to feel as if they could make use of those ball fields. So it seems like there's this disconnect where the university's position is that that is something that they're interested in entertaining, but it also seems as if the community is saying that historically they have not been able to utilize those facilities. We also heard
I don't see those. I don't see those as contradictory, but
yeah. And we did hear that there was definitely a need for more play fields because there are a lot of children in the community, and so they was interested in having kind of more designated play fields. There was essentially just an overall demand for kind of more accessibility. What we have is this very large institution that is surrounded by multifamily and single family homes that seems to have a plethora of opportunities that are not necessarily available to the people that kind of live in the area. And so everyone's saying that, I hope, well, the people that we spoke to, they said, I hope that as a result of this, that we're going to get more active play areas, that we're going to get more accessibility to kind of the existing infrastructure, and that, essentially it's more green. So it's very much in line with everything that I heard this evening as well. And no one said community garden. So this is new, not saying that it's not important. It's just, that was something that didn't come up. And a lot of it is just people don't always ask for things because they don't think that it's a possibility. And so they kind of just say, I'm going to go with something that I think I have a really good chance of getting, and they don't dream big. I always tell people in my plans, dream big, because the developer is going to dream as big as possible. So the community should do that as well.
If you don't mind, I'll just toss in one thing from Candace Hollingsworth, who was mayor of Hyattsville. She had a cool take on this. She thought food forests should be public health amenities that are as common in every neighborhood as your swing sets and sliding boards and play fields. And so we always design some open lawn area into the food forests when we do them. But I thought that was a really neat way of putting it that Mayor Hollingsworth had.
Question technical for Amy, if we have time. If not, I'm looking to see it's 8:30 already. Never mind.
I was just going to add a real point of clarity regarding Washington Adventist University. Yes, publicly they say that they would like to engage the community and let the community use their facilities, but that request always falls on deaf ears when legal counsel gets involved, and they cannot get around the liability issue. So they may say that to you, and that's how I guess the president and senior staff may feel, but they defer to their attorneys.
Okay, that's good to know, because that was kind of as the planning team was speaking with them, we couldn't understand why we were hearing that they can use it. And then I'm hearing from the community that there was this like I said, this disconnect. So that's good to know that that's what the actual issue is. And keep in mind, we're talking about, and I guess this is a good point to bring this up. We're talking about, we're looking at the plan comprehensively. So we're looking at both the university and the hospital. So we're looking at opportunities on both sides. So when you're thinking about the potential for things that you're interested in, I would encourage you to look at the potential for something to happen on the university side, as well as for something to happen on the hospital side. because we are taking a comprehensive look at both pieces of the campus.
I'd also just like to add it's not just the sports facilities that there is this dual messaging that we have often tried to set up meetings using their spaces, meetings that are interested in the entire community, people on the campus as well. But they say, oh, yes, yes, yes. But then when you go and try to set up a meeting, it's a closed door and it goes nowhere. So I'd just like to echo what Councilmember Smith has said, that it's very, very frustrating despite their proclamations.
Thank you for sharing that. We have regular meetings with them. Like I stated earlier, we do have regular meetings with them. I can't promise you that it's something we can correct in the short term, but I can tell you that in plans that I've done in the past where we've run into similar issues, we have been able to kind of broker, it's not even necessarily an arrangement. They can actually get credit, so to speak, credit for having public meeting space or providing for community meeting space in a development. They can get, that is added as a public benefit. So that's language that we can put in a plan. It's like I said, it may not be something that can help in the short term, but in the long term, as we're talking about the future of what any sort of development looks like on this campus, that is a common request. It's a common recommendation. We can definitely see about making sure that that type of language gets into the plan. I guess is kind of what I want to leave you with.
I don't want to monopolize here, but I'd just like to point out also there's many, many opportunities that we'd like to explore with members in Ward 5 and with the constituency of Councilmember Smith, whether it's Easter egg hunts, any number of activities, sports events, and so forth, that we would really actively promote in order to build a greater sense of community. Listen, the university is a barrier right now. It's a geophysical barrier. It really does not promote a dialogue among the different communities, our community and people in Ward 5 and other areas. So we really see this, it's for a social equity point of view and engagement. This is really important issue. So I'm really glad we're beginning to hear this and actually actively take work to break down this physical barrier that's also a social barrier.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, and like I say, when we talk to them, they talk about a future of this campus that's an open campus. They have said open campus almost every single conversation that I've had with them. So it sounds as if, you know, unfortunately, it sounds like the people at the top are saying that that's the dream for kind of this new and improved Washington Adventist campus. And so the question is, how do we get there? And so maybe it is kind of working through all of these legal elements that have to happen to get there. And maybe as a part of this process, what we can do is figure out what are the things that can happen in the short term to get us to this longer term goal of having a campus that acts as a unifying element and is not necessarily a barrier that, you know, is preventing people from coming together. And what should be kind of low-hanging fruit. There's this huge space in the middle of the community with green space and fields and activities and infrastructures there that everyone should be able to use. It's private, but we will figure out through this process, we'll figure out what we can do to build those bridges.
So it's past 8:30. I want to thank everyone for your attention and the presentations again to Melissa, Amy, Lincoln. Thank you, Council Members Smith and Dabala for attending and sticking with all of this and interacting with us on these issues. As you can see, there are many opportunities. And also thank you, David, for the perspective from Long Branch-Sligo Community Association. Amy has posted a link to her slides. I'm putting my email address. I'm just going to make a couple of plugs. Climate Action Coffee meets every Wednesday, 8 a.m. by Zoom. I put the link to the Tally Climate Action Coffee page where you can find the Zoom. And we've added these first Thursday evening sessions for those of you that have conflicts with the 8 a.m. time. And so far, they've been very rich. I will also note that we had a wonderful presentation, an assemblage of experts on Tuesday noon, sponsored by our pollinator group in partnership with Anamishi John and the City of Tacoma Park, focusing on raising awareness for National Invasive Species Awareness Week. And that recording, I think the city is going to be responsible for, but as soon as we have it, we will post it on our Tally Climate Action Coffee website. And then also staying on that theme, Pollinator Week is June 20th to 26th this week, and we will be organizing some sort of probably a series of events during that week. So stay in touch and reach out to us if you'd like to help, make that happen.
We have the Stormwater too forum coming up.
Yes, that's going to be on May 10th, midday, probably between 12 and 3 p.m. So pencil that in on your calendar. That also will be a very informative kind of presentation. We've received over, I think, 260 responses to our citywide survey regarding stormwater issues, and we're pulling together a number of experts to help us envision how we might address what, as David noted, is the growing problem. All right, any other last messages? Thanks again, everybody. This was great.